I am Mudita, and welcome back to Satisfactory. As the title of the video gives it away, I am still not building the ballistic warp drives yet. That should be in the next video. I realized I was a few hundred aluminum ingots short for what I need, and even more rubber. These are big enough projects I can take care of before I tackle the last monster factory. It will be much easier to bring these items in by train. Today, I'll be adding a few more factories. These will increase my production for aluminum by 1200 ingots per minute, 200 plastic, and 2400 rubber. Because I've made a number of each of these factories already, I wanted to try something different. I'll be using the instant scrap alternate recipe for the aluminum. Somehow, I came up with a new layout for mass producing rubber that I'm really happy with. I don't know why I did it the hard way for so long. We start in the red bamboo fields. I had to look it up because I always forget which part is the red jungle and which part is the red bamboo fields. If we take a look at the map, here we have this whole centerpiece, which is basically both. And it looks like it cuts kind of at a weird spot somewhere through here is where the cutoff is. It more or less follows this river and then kind of cuts down. So this whole side right here is the red bamboo fields. I'm going to be using this pure bauxite node. There's still a good amount of bauxite left, and so I thought about just gathering it all left and just doing one last factory, but I really just don't need that much. So I'm just going to use one pure node. I don't have radar coverage, but thankfully the sulfur node isn't too far away that I'm going to need, and then I'm going to use the two closest coal nodes. In hindsight, this does end up being a little bit wasteful because over here, many videos ago, I turned all of this crude oil into petroleum coke, and some of it is going all the way out here to my other aluminum factory. However, I left a whole bunch of it just sinking because my plan was to use it for any of this extra bauxite that I kind of had a feeling I was going to end up needing. But because I just don't feel like doing the exact same factory over again, and I want to try something new, I am just going to let that continue to sink. And, oh well. It's a little bit wasteful, but I'm not going to run out of oil, bauxite, or coal. So, really, what does it matter? I already mentioned the parts that I need, and here's the basic spreadsheet. I love that for such a major part to the game like aluminum, there's a number of different ways to do it, and they all kind of have their trade-offs. Because I'm at the very end of the game and I only have one last major thing to do, I know that I don't need sulfur for anything else. Which I think for most people is the main downside to the instant scrap alternate recipe, is it needs sulfur. And that can be really valuable for usually power generation, and a handful of other things. I'll need the 1200 bauxite from this node, 800 coal, so for that I'll need two nodes because I don't think either one of them is pure, and then sulfuric acid, I need 400, and to make that, I just need 400 sulfur, 400 water. Throw it all in a blender, and I've got my aluminum scrap. And then the pure aluminum ingot recipe just pairs up really nicely because I'm not dealing with silica, so why introduce any more silica? Since I've got the bauxite here, the coal really isn't too far away. I've also got water, which is deep enough for some water extractors. I think just building it right about here is as good of a spot as any. The other benefit, if we head this way, right past this waterfall, is the void, and then the grassy fields, which is where the very last factory is going to go. So give me a second and let me throw down some foundations. Thankfully, this factory really won't have to be too big. By placing it right over the bauxite, I can give myself plenty of room down here for a logistics area. And then I think all of the machines can easily fit right up here. So of course, I had to make a blueprint. Let's go through it. This is my one-stop shop for aluminum. Just plug in everything and you are good to go. For every 300 bauxite, you need one of these blueprints. So since I'm dealing with 1200, I'll just need to place this 4 times. 300 bauxite, 200 coal, 100 sulfuric acid, and 120 water will give me 600 aluminum scrap and 100 water. And this is important because this right here and this is the same amount. So all of that byproduct water is then going over to here and feeding into the refinery. This needs 100 sulfur, 100 water, and I get my 100 sulfuric acid. So that sulfuric acid, and then feeds right into the blender. So for each one of these, I'll need 120 water, and make sure that this has enough water to be able to kind of kickstart itself. Once the thing is started, then it's just a really convenient loop you've got. The 600 scrap then gets split into 4 smelters. Each one is completely overclocked, so they'll take 150 and give me 75 ingots. I just need to plug in bauxite here, coal here, 120 water into there, and I am good to go. And the sulfur into there. Almost forgot about that part. Then I'm good to go. This right here should be the middle of my platform, so I'm going to place 2 on this side. Make sure we've got enough space. And right there in the middle looks good. My thinking is it'll be easier to plug all of the inputs into this way, and then I can have the output go out this way. This right here is where I'm going to add a train station. So let's go ahead and just place down all of these. And it's as easy as that. There's all the machines. Because there's only 4 machines of each, all of the belt and pipe work is going to be really easy to do. The splitters and mergers stack really nicely onto each other, but if you need to mix both your solids and your fluids, you can hold control, but that's really not a good way to place one on top of here. So what I like to do is just place it right next to it, hit H, and then for each merger it's 2 meters. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And now I can nudge it into place. That way you can reliably place it in the spot you want. But balancing 4 machines is pretty easy, so I think we can skip that. And then merging everything together, I'm just going to merge it all into a center point, and then that way it can go off into the train station. If you have a situation like this where the total is going to be 1200, I have had much better luck having 2 600 belts merged together than basically doing it as one long manifold. If you did it in one long manifold, you just may not get the full 1200, and one of the machines may start kind of backing up. It'll probably be really slowly, but I definitely recommend just doing the 2 600 belts in the middle. The next thing I need is some water extractors, and I think I'm just going to place those down here. And then that way they just don't have far to go. Each blender needs 120 water, so I need 480 in total. I'll need 2 water extractors. Thankfully, that is plenty of space because each one is 2.5, so this will take up 5. And I know I've showed it before, but it's always worth showing again because I think it's one of the best little shortcuts. And then what I like to do is I like to place it halfway over, and then that way it'll give you 2 full meters before the foundation. And that way, if your foundations aren't quite at the exact level, it just gives it plenty of space without it looking super weird. Let me show you. If I grab the water extractor, make sure that I spin it into the right place before I hold control. Hit H to lock it. That looks good. So when I place it, now I can get rid of the tower. And when I place it here, as you'll see, the foundations aren't at the exact same level. Normally what I use is Auto 2D, and that will usually make the pipe as straight as possible, and I think that looks best for this little situation right here. But you can just hit R and go through all the different options. But by giving it this 2 meter gap, it just makes sure that you don't really have any issues right here. So I'll place it in Auto 2D, overclock it to 200%, and now I can just copy it and place it. And then this one will have the exact same gap. Let me tidy this up a little bit, get some of the basic belt work done, and then the next step I'm going to work on is bringing the coal over. So one of them really isn't too far. Yeah, here we go. Unfortunately, this one's in impure. The other one, unfortunately, is just a little bit farther over there. Let me get these belts in, and I'll show you where they're coming from. Instead of merging the 2 pipes together, which would have the benefit of only needing 1 pump then, it really doesn't have far to go until I would immediately split it back up. I think less junctions just makes things work a little bit better, so I decided to keep the 2 pipes separate. We've got the basic belt work in, so both the bauxite and the coal will just be fed from right underneath. And the coal, as we can see, 1 belt is coming from that side, and then the other one is just coming from right over here. Thankfully, that one was a nice short trip. The other one, let's go on a little bit of a journey. And here we are. Thankfully, this one's a normal node, so I'm going to take 500 from this one and then the full 300 out of the impure node. It's a little far for the belt, but I also really like having the belt just kind of snake through this jungle. This thing is built right on top of the bauxite, so that's right here. I've got the coal set up, the water set up. There's only one last piece, and that would be the sulfur. And like I just mentioned, right in this area seems like it would be a good place for a train station. And I just happen to have some new tools that help clear things out. That is much more efficient. I really should have made those sooner. But this new train station is going to have two, well, train stations, I guess. One of them is going to go from here to kind of the other side of the forest to pick up the sulfur. And then the other one is going to be available to ship out to where I want. Right now, I'm thinking somehow I want it to go from here down to that train station, because that's basically the main train station for the grassy fields. And it'd be easiest if I just start collecting things there, I think. But there is quite a bit of a gap in between here and there, so I'll have to think of a way to do that. I've been playing with trains for a few hours. Let me show you my progress. Here we are at the sulfur pickup. I really thought this sulfur node was higher, but that's okay, we've got lists for that. So I just need to bring that up, and then I'm just going to have it plug into the bottom. It'll go into one small storage container, and then get loaded onto the train. I only need 400 per minute, so I think one freight car is going to be more than enough. I am going to dress it up a little, but it's not going to be anything too fancy. Just using my basic supports to go all the way from this side to the other side. And then let me show you where I spent most of my time. So to get the final products from all the way up here to all the way down there, could have done a really long ramp, but I do like my spirals. I was actually going to leave this until later because I don't really need the train station right now. But then I realized the easiest way to move power is with the train line. So if I run this train to the final train station where it's going to go, it's pretty easy to power that one on. And then that way I can power everything else over here just through the train line. The train just comes out of the station, goes over the waterfall, and then right along this ridge. And then I was able to utilize my existing blueprint and just kind of spam that a whole bunch of times all the way down. But since this is a push-pull train, I got to use the smaller version where I only need one track, which I think does look a little bit smoother. When I have the two tracks next to each other, you can really notice that the way that they curve just isn't quite the same. So I think having one track looks a little less weird. And then once it drops all the way down to the height that it needs to be at, I thought it would just be easier to just keep it at that height instead of dropping it all the way down, because I would like it to be closer to the ground, but at the same time it felt silly to drop all the way down to the ground just to then go right back up. Although it probably would have looked cleaner to keep it more along this grass path instead of just elevated so high, but I went the easy option, and I still don't think it looks too bad. So it just heads right into this train station, which I am now realizing this is definitely going to have to get bigger. With this being the main train station for the area, I'm going to also need to bring in that plastic and rubber. But I kept the pattern really simple, so just knocking off one wall and extending it is super easy to do here. I'll just need to add the unload balancers and then just a sink right here. And then since the train is stopping here, I've got plenty of room to just add a sink. And this is where it'll sit until the next video. Alright, well, now it's that time. The save is currently at 575 hours and 48 minutes. Now I'm going to spend a couple hours dressing this thing up, and I'll take you on a quick little tour before we get it started. Welcome back. to my fourth and what hopefully should be final aluminum factory. The save is currently at 579 hours and 44 minutes. Before we take a look at this, let me show you the train station over yonder. So I decided to try something a little bit different with this one, and for me, the jury is still out. It didn't come out quite like I hoped, and really it only looks quite right when you're up close. It just looks a little weird from far away, I think, but when it's up close, it's kind of the way I imagined. So I decided to just try to make all of the walls out of the small concrete pillars. The cool thing about doing this is it's really easy just to cut out 4 of these, and that's the exact size of a window. So wherever you want to add a window, just chop out a 2x2, and there you go. And then patching the wall is also really easy. And then instead of having it just be a giant cube, I try to bring it in a little bit, but that proved to be a little bit more difficult, and I don't know. These are all 2 meters wide, but if I bring it in by 2 meters, you can kind of see the gap in between the pillars, and that looked a little bit funny. I think using either the foundations or the pillars of different sorts to make the walls gives you a lot of cool options, but I don't know if I quite executed the way I wanted to on this one. But hey, it works, and hopefully with the roll-up gate in the front, it should keep all of the nasty spiders out, so that if I ever visit back here, hopefully I don't have to deal with those. Now let's take a look at the factory, and well, the train station is just kind of all one piece, I guess. So with these, I decided to just use the ramps and inverted ramps to create that little shape for the opening, and then just a whole bunch of the label 4-meter signs. And I've showed it before, but I think it's worth showing again. This is always kind of a pain if you want to put the signs on the ramps. The way you need to go about it is you get your painted beam. You want to put it in diagonal, or freeform would probably work. And then you're just going to stretch it across this whole thing. And thankfully, I'm putting it on this side of the beam, so I can just place it right on the beam. And then holding control, I'm going to hit page up, and that'll do the 1/2 meter. And that's going to be right where I want it. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side and nudge it up by that 1/2 meter. Now I can delete the beam, and then I'm going to take one more, and to get it so that there's no lines visible, I'm going to lock it in place here and then nudge it so that it overlaps both of them. And then when you place it, you won't see any of the seams. Now if I wanted to do the same thing, but it wasn't on the underside or the top side of the foundation, like for example, I wanted to place it across here, this will lock to the top or the bottom fine, but if I try to lock it to the side, there's a good chance, even with control, you're not going to get quite the right angle. So if that's the case, what you want to do is just place a concrete pillar. And you can just place one on either side, and then I delete the beam, grab yourself the sign. Now you can get it to match here, so just lock it in place. I'm going to nudge it forward 1, now it's right against the wall, and now I'm just going to nudge it to the right, and it's going to follow that same line. So you just nudge it to 4 meters. You can do the same thing on this side, and then do the same trick. Lock it in place next to one of them, nudge it over, and now it looks like just one long sign. I decided to use lots of the full frame windows just because they're probably my favorite ones. I'm going to add a big window like this. It's just nice to be able to actually see what's on the other side. The coal is all running, it's just being sunk right underneath. And then for the water, I decided to mainly cover it, keep all the riffraff out. And then we've just got a little walkway. This guy is just trapped in here, but I've got my 2 water extractors that I can get to on either side. From inside the train station, I decided I should probably wall it off at least a little bit, but then I've got the 2 gate wall holes here, and we've got some stairs, and then this part goes all the way around. I've got an elevator to take me to the logistics floor. And here is the factory. I do like how simple this alternate recipe setup ends up being. Even though I did enclose the whole thing because I don't want spiders jumping in here, I did add some vents this time. And then the final product all gets grouped together right here and then just goes underneath to go to the buffer and then into the train. So for the startup process, what I did is, because thankfully there's just a free spot right here, I just grabbed a junction and placed it where it was full, and that's why I now have this where it's split in between the two. I'd placed a junction over here so that I could take the water that I already have connected, and then I could fill up just this pipe. So thankfully it can't accidentally fill up this. but now the sulfuric acid refinery is completely full of water. Until this starts running, this can only make a limited quantity of sulfuric acid, but that has plenty enough water to be able to kickstart this whole thing. Once this starts running, then it'll constantly supply it with the water that it needs. So all I needed to do was just make sure that the refinery and then this one section of pipe is completely full. And that's all I really needed to do. It did just make the pipes look a little bit funny, but as you're about to see, this thing comes to life pretty quick. We've got the unload balancer for my 400. And as you can see, this is an easy one. So we've got 480 coming off the Mark IV belt. If we split that into thirds, we've got 160, 160, 160. We take one of those and split it in half. There's my 80 that I need to loop back, group everything back up, and I've got 400. So I just needed to loop back 1/6, and here is my 400 that goes off into the factory. And then I already have both the bauxite and the coal running. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start with the sulfur, just because that's on a slightly slower belt than the other ones. Once that refinery starts, then we can send everything else in. Let's go ahead and start that stopwatch. And just like that, we're up to 1200 per minute. Not too shabby. Although to be honest, I think all of my aluminum setups start up ridiculously fast. I think my very first playthrough may have been the only time I've ever really tried to use this alternate recipe. And back then, I made the same mistake that I've made so many times, and just try to group up way too many things together and then send it off to the next step, instead of trying to break things down into smaller, more manageable pieces like this. I really like having this as, 4 really small systems, because then these 4 smelters only need to deal with 600, and I don't have to worry about trying to combine the 2 600 belts into making a full 1200 and then moving that to a different floor and then resplitting it up. If you can lay it out so that you can break some of these things into much more manageable pieces, I think it's so much easier. I think if you can avoid getting to kind of like the max belt speed or the max throughput of the pipe by breaking it down into these smaller systems, I just don't have to worry about it. And I think the game just has an easier time dealing with it that way. And here goes the train. So other than making sure that I don't have throughput issues, even though this is the only train on the track, so it really shouldn't, I have this set to fully load. Once this goes all the way down to the grassy fields, drops it off and comes back, it'll just wait here, probably not for more than 2 minutes, and then it heads back. But that way it goes down with a full freight car each time. The spirals are much more fun to watch when you're not actually in the train. Even for me, it's a little dizzying being inside. And there we go. The 1200 per minute has made its way over to this train station. I'm not sure where exactly in the grassy fields this final factory is going to be, but I figure gathering things right here is a good start. I'm going to keep an eye on this to make sure that no issues pop up, but usually with these sorts of factories, if it doesn't show up in the first, probably 30 minutes, I'm probably going to be good to go. There aren't that many places where buffers are built up that are kind of hiding the issue until it finally shows up. Usually if the throughput of something is off, you'll find out pretty quickly. While I let this continue to run, I'm going to head out to the west coast and use the last bit of oil I have available out there. Back at my wonderful west coast. Time to add a centerpiece to this whole thing. I temporarily brought over some power just from the nearby oil node, just so I could turn it on and get all these satellite things placed. This sound and animation is a little annoying, so we're going to go ahead and just power it off for now. Fully overclocked, this will produce 900 crude oil. And here's the spreadsheet. So as we can see, we're going to take all 900 crude oil, turn it into heavy oil residue. then turn all of that into fuel using the diluted fuel alternate recipe. Using the same recycled alternate recipes that I've been using for the plastic and rubber this whole time, I am going to spend 1/3 of the fuel making plastic, and then I'm going to turn all of that plastic into rubber using the other 2/3 of the fuel. All of the polymer resin from that very first step is going to be turned into plastic. In total, this is going to net me 2,400 rubber and 200 plastic. I'm just going to place down some foundations real quickly just to give you an example of how I used to do it and how I'm going to be doing it this time. Alright, so here is a very, very basic layout of more or less how I used to always do this. If I'm making equal parts of plastic and rubber, being able to pair the two refineries next to each other so that some of the output for one is the input for the other, and then you still get half, basically. These setups have worked fantastic when you need more or less equal amounts of both. However, when it was time to turn all of that oil into only plastic or only rubber, this is basically what I did. So the first step is identical. Take the crude oil, turn it into heavy oil residue, and then into fuel. And then, because in this setup I want to make rubber, I am going to use the residual rubber to take all of that polymer resin and turn it into rubber. And then this rubber is going to go to this step. This step right here is doing the recycled plastic. So I'm going to be taking the rubber, and then it's going to be the same sort of thing where it's 1/3 of the fuel is going to go to this step. And then 2/3 of the fuel goes to this step. So you're going to need twice as many refineries here as you do here. So then for every one of these refineries, you'd be able to feed 2 of these. But of course, I rarely set it up that way. And so I'd end up grouping it all together and then resplitting it all up. But the tricky part about this whole setup is that this step, using the residual rubber, won't provide enough rubber to fuel this. So what you end up having to take is some, but not all, obviously, of the final output and merging it back into the beginning. Obviously, there's a bunch of different ways you could go about doing it, depending on how you want to have it all set up, and if you're load balancing versus manifolds, and use smart splitters for overflow. There's a whole bunch of different ways you could do this. And I'm pretty sure I saw somebody else do it this way, so I figured this just must be the best way to do it. And my first thought was to do it pretty much the exact same way. But I'm short just a little bit of plastic, and the downside to doing it this way is I would be turning all of the oil into only rubber, and I wouldn't really be able to split off any of that plastic, or at least not easily. Now that's cleaned up, let me show you the 2 blueprints I'm going to use that I think make this a whole lot easier. First step, nothing too special. We've got the refinery and the blender. Though I did decide to add a little up top, and it sure does look weird when it's just in the blueprint designer. I promise it'll look less weird when it's in the factory. But as the intro gave it away, this is going to be a tower, and I didn't want to make the floors super tall, and I wanted it to have some sort of way to suck up the smoke, right? So this is what I came up with. But I'll go over that later. I also decided to just run the power along the ceiling, and so those are all at the exact right height for how tall the floor is going to be. So everything starts right here with the refinery. This is completely overclocked, so 75 crude oil will become 100 heavy oil residue and 50 polymer resin. The heavy oil residue just snakes right in between the two and feeds into the blender. We take that 100 heavy oil residue, 200 water, this is at 200%, and I'll get 200 fuel. And I've got a spot to get rid of my polymer resin. And that leads us to the second blueprint. And here are the 3 refineries. I'm just going to plug it into one of these 2, using good old straight mode probably. And so let's take a look. So the 2 outside refineries are the rubber. So this is overclocked to kind of weird numbers, but it made it so that I could keep everything kind of in the same ratios, essentially. Normally I try to avoid these numbers, but 66 and 2/3, multiply that by 3, there's our 200. So obviously both of the recycled rubber are clocked to the same, but so is the recycled plastic. So they all intake that exact same fuel. So that 200 fuel that I'm making in the blender is getting split in between the 3 refineries. And then the way this works is the output for the plastic goes into a lift and then a splitter, and then evenly gets split between the 2 other refineries. And then if we come to this side, this refinery goes into a lift and then a splitter. And so half of it, so if we see 133.33, if you divide that by 2, That'll get me my 66.66, which is what this needs. So half the output for this one feeds this machine, and then goes on to get grouped up with this one. And it'll go out to a farther merger, so I can group up multiple of these blueprints together. And then with the fuel, it just makes sense to make it a giant loop if you're going to do this sort of a design. No matter what, there's going to be some sort of sloshing as much as I try to prevent it. Before I started this specific project, I actually spent a little while topping off things around at the other factories because things weren't actually running quite as well as I was hoping. So I'll talk about it at the end of the video, but the very last video in this playthrough is going to be kind of a world tour, and I'm going to go through a number of my lessons learned and things that I would do differently. I've gone through a bunch of things that I screwed up in the past and, fixed over the course of the playthrough. But I have started to take some notes on things that I haven't talked about in the playthrough yet, and so I'll save that for the very last video. One of those lessons learned was definitely the pipes, and making a loop out of it where you can really does help. I really like this design. However, it does have one downside that I'm sure some people wouldn't be crazy about. It's the same sort of thing as with all of those. The thing I love about it is this thing won't get started right away. I can let the fuel completely fill up all of these pipes and everything, and then I'm going to have to feed a little bit of rubber into each of these plastic refineries. Now, if you didn't want to do that, you could probably grab, you probably want a little bit more than 10, but you could even save it in the blueprint. I personally like to make sure that the fuel pipes are all completely full and then get it started, and so I really don't mind it being kind of staggered like this, but you do have to manually put things into each machine to kickstart it. It won't just come to life like most of my other factories. So this will take care of all of the oil. I will still need a couple refineries to deal with the polymer resin, but the nice thing with this design is now I get to choose, do I want that polymer resin to turn into plastic or rubber? I can either get 300 rubber or 200 plastic. Thankfully, the amount that I'm short is like 180 something, so 200 plastic is perfect. Alright, now that the plan and the examples are out of the way, let me clean this stuff up and place one more layer of foundations, because the very bottom here can be the logistics floor. The next floor will just go right on top of it. This factory is going to need some pumps, but if I play my cards right, I can kind of turn those into a design feature. And here's the humble beginnings of the new tower. And I only needed a gap of 6 foundations. And I think this is enough space. There's a possibility I might need one more row of foundations on one side. We'll probably go out this way if I do. Let's see, and this is a 10 by 11 right now. Really, I can make it face any direction. But I think right here is going to be enough area for all of the water extractors, because I do need more than 2 this time. And then that means it would be easiest if all of the pipes went up on this side, in my opinion. So we'll have the pipes feed in this way, and I guess the final product will kind of go out that way. Alright, and I think if I give myself 2 foundations, that'll be plenty of space to deal with any of the pipe work I need. And if I line these up just right on the center, that should give me a little bit of space on either side. So I should have enough space to do 2 of these, and then that way, instead of having to do 12 floors, I only need 6. And I almost forgot the one other just absolutely beautiful thing that you may or may not have realized about this whole setup. The refineries need 75 crude oil at a time. Now, if I go down here, these output in multiples of 75. So an impure node is 75, and the normal nodes are 150. And I have one pure node of 300. So this will feed 4 of those blueprints, this will feed 2, and those will feed 1. Which makes the pipe work really easy, because now I don't need to combine these. I can actually just plug them straight into however many refineries they'll actually feed. And for one, that just means I'll have more pipes running up the side, which I think will look cool. And I think it has the added benefit of less junctions means hopefully more reliability. And then I just switch to this blueprint, and I'm actually just going to put this in blueprint mode and make sure it's facing the right way, because that should be all the room I need. I'm actually going to delete this merger and just have this lift connect into there, and that's all the polymer resin. And then this right here, I don't actually need to use this output. This is the plastic being split in between the 2 rubber refineries. So now I just need to make sure that this is actually lined up in the middle. So there's one. And make sure the pipes don't overlap or anything weird. Oh, everything looks good. And there's two. And that's the first floor. So this is only going to be 50 polymer resin. So just need to mark one belt. And that's all done. For the pipes, I think I'm going to go to the outside one for each side. So this side will go to that one. And then on this one, we'll plug it to that one. Yeah, I like the way that looks. And then on this side, I can do the same thing. So 133.33 and then half of that times 1.5. I'm going to have 200 coming out of each of these mergers. So this is going to be a Mark III. It's as easy as that. I'll obviously need to do a little bit of connecting the power. And probably not the best way to do it, but I can just nudge up a whole bunch of times until it's in the right spot. And there it is. So that is what these are supposed to actually look like. It's going to cover up the bulk of the big pillar support. So now it looks like that. Quite a bit different. And there we go. I think the floor is pretty compact. I'm sure you could make it a little bit tighter if you wanted to, but I like it. Let me go ahead and add the rest of the floors and then we can spam down a few more machines. And there we go. Let's fill it up with a whole bunch of machines. I think it's easiest to focus on one blueprint and then switch to the other one. I'm going to make sure that these are all in the exact right spot. Now I can switch to the second blueprint, lock it in place, and then I think I just need to nudge each one of these over by 1 meter. It definitely needs a roof so that very top floor doesn't look so weird, but that was really fast. Now I just need to go through and do that really simple belt and pipe work. That's going to be really easy to do. Just connect a few pipes there and then just a couple lifts. And because every floor is laid out the exact same way and in the exact same spot, that means that all of these mergers will be in the same spot. So I can just place a whole bunch of floor holes and then just have one vertical lift going from the top all the way to the bottom, and then just add the mergers onto there. And then I'll be able to do something similar for the rubber, although I'll have to switch it up a little bit because I'm making 2,400 in total. So with that one, I could have just 2 Mark 6 belts, or I may split it up. Besides that basic stuff, I think I want to get started on my pipe wall to take all of the oil and then also the water that I need up to each different floor. I think I've settled on how I want to do it. Let me show you. I think it'll be easiest if I have just a little bit of section of foundation on each level to be able to place floor holes. So I'm going to place these on each spot right here. I've got 6 black and then 6 blue. I think almost all, if not all of these pipes can be Mark 1, but I kind of like the look of the Mark 2s. So I think I'm just going to make all of these Mark 2. And actually this very first one isn't going to go here. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to have the inside ones are the ones that are going to go all the way up to the top. And so we'll just start branching them off from either end. So this very first pipe will go to this floor. For the water, it will be 1 pipe per floor. That's right, each of the water pipes, those need to all be Mark II because each blender needs 200 water, so each floor needs 400. And so this one will branch off here. The other thing I still need is 4 more refineries to deal with all of the polymer resin. And I think I'm going to put the water extractors out here. And then I think I'm just going to have the other ones on the other side. And they're just going to be attached to it right here, but kind of off on their own because I could add 1 more floor and put those 4 up there at the top. But everything else is just so symmetrical and it all works together so well. I think I'm just going to have it kind of be its own little thing down here at the bottom. And then that gives me plenty of options. I can either add one more water extractor, because those 4 refineries I think only need 200 water in total. Or really there's plenty of places I could throw a water extractor. Just gives me lots of options. Let me finish that pipe wall and put those refineries in, and I'll show you. And there it is. All of the pipes and I think all of the pumps that I need. So I went with my plan. The 2 impure nodes went down at the bottom, and then we've got the 3 normal nodes, and then the last 2 floors are fed by the 1 pure node. And it's a little bit hard to tell, but one side is black and one side is blue. The fix-it walls probably would have showed that off better. And then the last 4 refineries up here. I think they're just far enough away that it'll give me plenty of room to do any of the aesthetics, and hopefully it'll give me something fun to work around. Had to repower this one on so that I could change around where the satellites are, because you can't place them unless this thing is powered. I get it, but it's so annoying. And because they're all in the right spot, let's go ahead and just delete that. Ah, nice and quiet again. But unfortunately, the little satellite things are never quite in an even spot, so either they have to like slightly ramp up or slightly ramp down. But that's okay, it's the logistics floor. I can hide the ugliest pipework down here. And then I've got to set up pumps all here on the first floor. And that should easily be able to get it to the second set, which I'm not realizing. Oh yeah, so if you hold it here, it'll get up to there, but I don't actually want to put it right there. A little too close for comfort. And we're just going to line it up with all the rest of them. There we go. Now the next step is the water extractors. I think I'm just going to find a good height. Will that go right over the pipe? Oh, perfect. So yeah, we can come right over that. I'll just have these new water pipes go up and over that oil pipe. So let's just find a good spot. Budget. Yeah, seems like that's probably a good spot. So now I just need a few water extractors. Each one of those pipes needs 200 water, so 2 water extractors. So just for this section, I need 12. And just like that, we've got all 12 in place. Every 2 of them is paired into 1 pipe, so we've got 400 on each one. Even though all of the extractors and the machines give you that free 10 meters of head lift, I really prefer to put that very first pump just horizontal. Even though I could get a little bit more head lift out of it, I've just had great luck doing it this way. I learned it from bits, and I've just stuck with it since then. Really never had an issue with pumps. All 6 pipes just go up and over, and then into the wall. And with that, I've got all of the machines and all of the basic belt and pipe work done, which means it's decoration and power time. The save is currently at 584 hours and 31 minutes. See you in a blink of an eye. Welcome back to my 4th and final plastic and rubber factory. The save is currently at 587 hours and 56 minutes. Let's start our quick little tour out here. I just added some walls and then windows around all of the water extractors. We come to the other side. I do have a little bit of an entrance that has a walkway to a hypertube, so we can get from the main factory over to here pretty easily. I didn't want to make this section too much bigger, so I just added some catwalks that just go right over the pipes. But you can get all the way around. All the water extractors are on and completely backed up, so all of these pipes should be completely full. Before we head into the main factory, let me show you the rest of the outside. A little bit easier to see once you get farther away, but the pipes are lined with the 4-meter lights right here, and then all the way through the middle of the wall. Since this factory is mainly making rubber, I decided I wanted to make it mainly black, and then adding the blue with the rest of the blues in the area looked a little bit funny, so I went with black and white. A little bit boring, but hey, it fits my theme. Very cow-colored. On this side of the factory, I used the ramps and the inverted ramps to give it the octagon-shaped windows. And instead of windows and enclosing this whole thing, I thought it would be best to just use the frame floors and then just nudge them into the right spot so that they're not clipping through the smokestacks. The 12 water extractors were so symmetrical that I didn't want to add just one more over there, and I didn't really want to have just one out here by itself. It just looked weird next to the tower. So instead, I still had plenty of empty room underneath this plastic and rubber factory. So if I head down here and all the way to the back, There was one that I needed for this factory, and now there's a second lone water extractor, just kind of hidden down here. And so that pipe goes all the way through, and then out through here in the foundation, and into the new factory. As you can tell by the other factories in this area and throughout my world, when I'm dealing with fluids, I rarely make it into a tower. But I'm really glad I switched things up here at the end because I like the way that it turned out. Very compact way to make over 2,000 rubber. Let's drop down inside and show you the differences in here. This is where all of the final products are dropping down and then heading over. And then I decided to just belt them right on top of all of the rest of the belts that I have going all the way to the train station. This one right here will be the 200 plastic. And then instead of trying to do 2 belts of exactly 1,200, I went with 3 belts of 800. And that was for 2 reasons. Because of the way that I've split up all of the floors, there's going to be 400 on each floor. And I think it's best is when you do 2 600 belts merging together. I've tried 3 400 belts. I don't think it worked out nearly as well. Maybe things have changed since I tried that though. But the more I thought about it, the distance isn't too far, but it would be a whole lot easier if I just didn't have to worry about the throughput. So if I have belts of 800 per minute is actually only 4 stacks because each stack is 200. So that would be 32 stacks in a freight car divided by the 4. That means the train needs to do its round trip in 8 minutes, and I think it should be able to do that. Worst case scenario, I just divide all of these in half, and then I've got plenty of time for that train to be able to make its round trip. On this side, all of the polymer resin is being fed in by this belt, so if we head through this hole in the wall, we've got our oil extractor here. So this is the only thing that's not powered on. I just need to connect that to power and it will be good to go. I wanted to see how long it would take if everything was completely empty. So I went through and I went to the full pipe network and I flushed all of these. So all of the oil pipes are completely empty. The water pipes are all completely full. The polymer resin just drops down here and then that gets fed on over to those refineries. Go ahead and take our elevator to the next floor. Because I just didn't feel like making this platform even bigger, I went with more catwalks along the inside, and because of the lack of space and how tall some of the pipes got in places, I needed to get a little bit creative. So right when you get out of the elevator, you can take a ladder up to the second floor here. And then that can get you all the way across the pipes. And then on this first floor is where the hypertube connections are that'll take you either to the water extractors or over to the train station. And here on this side, we've got the lifts that go from the very top all the way back down to that logistics floor. This very first one will be doing the polymer resin, and we've got the vertical merger placed on there. Thankfully this time around, I didn't actually have any issues with the vertical mergers. Now the way I did it to try to make sure I didn't have any issues, I went through and I placed all of the lifts from floor to floor. And then at the very bottom, I made sure I placed this and even the belt connecting to it. And at the very top, I made sure it had its very top lift section and the belt connecting to its merger. And then as the very last thing, I went back and placed the vertical mergers. And doing it in that order, everything works great. And on this side, we've got the 3 different ones, because like I said, I really think merging 600 belts together just works out better. And since each of these floors is going to have 200, I just thought that this would be the much more reliable way to do it. Every 2 floors gets grouped together, and then I've got a lift of 800. And I forgot to show it off. Instead of adding a whole separate hypertube, I just added a branch to this one. So now there's just one hypertube that takes you to all 3 of these different factories. So this one, you can branch to here or you stay to here. And then when you come to this point, you can go here to here. And then from any of these, you can go all the way back to the train station. This is where I love the hypertubes, the kind of in-biome logistics. Just like the other plastic and rubber factories, I'm going to turn on the oil, I'm going to get all of the fuel produced, and then I'm going to let all of those pipes completely back up. I want all of the oil, all of the fuel, all of the water to be completely full. And then I'm just going to pull 3 stacks of rubber out of my dimensional depot. I've got 6 floors, and each of those floors has 2 of the refineries that need rubber. And thankfully, it all gets started very quickly. So a stack of 50 into each one of those machines is going to be more than enough. Let's see how long it takes to make all of this rubber and plastic. An easy way for me to be able to tell when everything backs up is when all of these bottom pumps shut off. Now the pipes are completely full and it can't push any more through there. So let's go floor by floor and add all that rubber. Now we're getting the 600 polymer resin we're looking for. Which means if we come to this side, it's reading 200 plastic. Perfect. And I think because of the cycle times of the machines, it ends up being kind of bursty. So the 800 on the 1200 belt is only going to be 2/3 full anyways, but then it gets concentrated in certain amounts and then it's kind of empty. And don't think it's ever going to read 800 for very long. I think this is actually going to vary by quite a bit. Things are reading the right numbers over here. Let's go over to the train station. Over here, I've got my 4 new sinks. The 200 plastic, that stays nice and consistent. These 800 belts jump all over the place from 794 to 805 or 6 or something like that. And I don't think all 3 of them read 800 at the same time, like ever. I'm definitely going to need to keep my eye on it and make sure that it is actually the 800 per minute. Because the pipes are so much longer here compared to the aluminum factory that I just built. With the amount of machines and the amount of pipes and how long they are, this one can take a little bit longer for any random weird subtle problems to show themselves. So I'm going to have to keep an eye on this one for probably an extra couple hours. Not that I'm too worried, but wow, I am using 435 out of my 568. That's a decent chunk of it. I'm sure I'll be fine. Well, who doesn't love a funny story? Really wouldn't be one of my late game videos if I didn't screw up something, right? Before I started this project, I came over here and I figured out exactly how much plastic and rubber I had free. And I double checked everything and I wrote it down in my spreadsheet. And because I am just oh so good at this, I looked at the wrong column. Not that I need 188. What I actually need for this next factory is 442. So this 188, even plus the 200, just isn't quite enough. So right now I am making way more rubber than I need. I actually only needed to make a little over 1200, but I'm not making enough plastic. So let me jump in this hypertube and go back to the factory. After a few minutes of self-loathing, I realized that this actually isn't the worst thing in the world. It does give me the opportunity to show you all just how great this blueprint is. Because now what I'm going to do is just flip-flop it. Everything is just headed to a sink, and if I stop the process on anything, it's just going to end up backing up these pipes, which I'm totally okay with. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to Control-C, and Control-V, Control-V. And then I'm going to take the rubber one, and I'm going to make that one the middle. Let's go ahead and flip-flop our colors. There we go. Here's our new setup. Now, the one downside is I do have to make sure that I get all of this out because this is not the actual product anymore. And if I hover my dismantle tool over here, I can see that there's still plastic in here. So if I just delete the lift and replace it on either side, that'll get rid of everything. And then if I come back to this side, this should be fine, but you never know. Alright, so these are empty too. So now I can basically just do the same thing, just in reverse. So now I've just swapped this blueprint to make plastic instead of rubber. All I need to do is drop a little bit of plastic in here. Now half of the floor is making 200 plastic, the other half is still making the 200 rubber. And that would actually be enough, but that feels a little bit weird. I'm going to be making more of each than I really need. So I think what I'm going to do is just convert the top 2 floors. So the one whole belt of 800 is now going to be plastic. I'll still have the 200 down below that's being made into plastic. And then I'll still have 200 belts of 800 rubber, which is more than I need to finish the game. And now the top 2 floors are completely converted. We're just making 800 plastic, and then if I go down, we'll see the rest of the floors are still making rubber. And if we go all the way down here, and this had the added benefit of allowing me to simplify the belts and just get rid of one completely. Instead of having that extra belt of 200 plastic, might as well just join it up with this one, so now that I have a belt of 1000 and then 2 of 800 rubber. Unfortunately, all these numbers tend to fluctuate a lot, which is kind of a bummer. I wish that it would just read a nice solid number, but what can you do? Now it looks a little bit cleaner with only having 3 belts in my opinion. They just stack conveniently on top of the existing ones. I actually needed to raise this by 2 meters just to accommodate that extra belt that was going under here. This allowed me to drop it down the 2 meters back to its normal level, and things just fit a little bit better this way. And if we come back to the train station, we're basically reading the right numbers. They do fluctuate more than I wish they would, but I don't really know a way to get around that. As far as screw-ups go, I think this might be the easiest one to fix yet. If I had set this up like how I originally planned and how I used to do it in my previous playthroughs, this would have been a nightmare. Well, to be honest, I would have just been making way too much rubber, and I would have found the last little bits of oil that I could in the world, and then just made more plastic there. But I'm really happy I didn't have to do that, and I am just so happy with this kind of a layout. I'm sure the blueprints will end up changing, but this layout with these recipes, I'm really happy with it. Thankfully, I did the smart thing and decided to double check my numbers before I finished the video, and that's why I caught it now. And it also made me realize that I still have quite a few machines to build for this very last factory, and I could chip away at a little bit more if I wanted to. As I've mentioned before, the plan is for this final factory to be out here in the grassy fields. Even though it doesn't have very many pure nodes, there's still more than enough resources out here for what I need. There is a little bit of water, but there's not a ton. I could use the lake back here, but I don't really want to. I have plans to use refinery for the pure Caterium ingot. I also need over 1,000 copper sheets, and so the steamed copper sheet recipe just seems like an obvious choice. And if I'm going to use that one, well, I might as well just use the pure copper ingot as well. And that should actually be all of the refineries I need for this final factory. Hopefully Editor Me will add some little arrows. We've got a pure Caterium node on the right and a pure copper node here on the left. And trust me, I did really think about building a dam factory. But instead I have another idea, and I still wanted to use this area and it be kind of scenic, but it's not going to be the traditional dam you normally see in this area of the map. And now I've got some foundations placed. This factory takes up a fair amount of space, but the whole thing is pretty basic because we're not making complex parts here. So let me show you the blueprints of what I'm going to do. Because the Caterium node is coming from right there, so it would be closer to this side. So we'll do Caterium on this side, and then the copper is coming from right over there. So the copper will be on the other side, and my idea is to have the train station run right down the middle. And that way it can enter this side, it'll exit this side, and then it'll get, a little bit of a scenic route going back. So let me just place one of these. I'm going to need a total of 18 refineries. I'm going to be taking 1,068 Caterium ore and the same amount of water. And since the ratio is 2 ore to 1 ingot, we cut that in half. This is going to make 534 Caterium ingots. And all of it's going to end up being used for quick wire. So I could make it here, but I think it's going to be a lot easier to transport the 534 ingots as opposed to the 2,670 quick wire I'll need. doesn't have too far to go, so I'd rather just transport the ingots. And the reason this is this tall is if I delete one of these, I definitely should have double checked, but I was pretty sure this was deep enough for water extractors. Thankfully it is. The water extractors will fit under here and still have plenty of space, and then I'll just pump up the water. And if you've ever ran into this, you do have to delete the blueprint, because even if I delete this and then I grab the water extractor, it won't let me place it. I can place it right here, but because it's still within the box of this blueprint, it won't place. But once you delete it, now I can place it anywhere over here. Water extractors just do not like blueprints. And then for the other side of the factory, I was able to modify my 4 pure copper ingot blueprint. And so the way this is going to work is I'm just going to have 2 of them. Basically, we're just going to place one just right behind the other. The first step is the pure copper ingots. It's going to take this somewhat awkward number of copper ore. Now, obviously, I could have used more or less and gotten nicer numbers to deal with. But the end number right here, 51.9, is pretty nice. Especially because what we're going to do is just switch this one to the steam copper sheet. It's going to need a few more power shards, but then we're going to just switch this to 51.9. I am going to need 20 refineries for this step, but this whole middle section is just going to get deleted. And those 51.9 ingots will just go from one blueprint to the next. And that'll still give me plenty of room to deal with the water. In total, this is only going to need 415.2 copper ore. For the steam copper sheet, I'll just need an extra 1038 water. So the first step could actually all fit on one pipe, whereas the second step, I'm going to need a minimum of 2 pipes. Well, as you can see, this factory is not going to be complicated, and this is stuff that I've done a whole bunch of times already. So let's go ahead and just skip ahead. And we're back with all the machines in place. The Caterium side only needed 18 refineries, so that's why there's a little bit extra room on either side, whereas the other one needed the full 20, which needs exactly 25 foundations. We've got the rail line that kind of slopes down here a little bit, and then the incoming rail line is going to go straight through the factory. I thought it would be fun to drop the train down a little bit instead of having it just on the same level as all the refineries. It helps add a little bit more depth, and it has the added benefit of giving me a place to put all of the storage containers for the buffer down here, where they can be a little bit more hidden. Even though the train station is just right over there, I thought it would be best to split everything up into 2 freight cars each. That way I can actually have it wait here for 5 or 6 minutes instead of it running constantly in between these 2 train stations. As we can see, there's a fair amount of traffic already, so if I don't have one just continuously running right here, I think that'd be nice. And thankfully, I'm dealing with even amounts of refineries. So we just have 9 on either side, they both meet up right here in the middle, and then I'll be able to send them into each of the different freight cars. And then I did the exact same thing on this side, except for we've got 20 refineries, so it's 10 on each side. They just meet here in the middle, and then I'll send them over to their freight cars. Since I'm building this right on top of the water extractors, I don't really see the point in combining them just to have it go up, 10 meters and then split back off. So instead of using the Mark II pipes and having to group a whole bunch of the water extractors together, I have it so the one that goes backwards here, this one is feeding half of the pure copper ingots. So I only need 138.4. And if we come over here, we can see it comes up and it feeds the first 10. And then we have another pipe on that side and that does the other 10. But for the copper sheets, that needed 4 water extractors. So instead of combining them, each one does 259.5. And then it feeds 5 refineries. And because of the way the pipes are laid out, this should be really reliable. At least that's sure what I'm hoping. On this side, I only have the 1 step and I don't need to take solid from one refinery to the next. So I just kept the pipes on the bottom and they're doing a similar thing where instead of joining 2 water extractors and then just re-splitting it up right here, I just have 1 water extractor feeding the 3. Each set of 3 refineries need 178 ore and 178 water. I really don't think that this side will have any issues, but I am kind of curious to see if maybe the other side and the way that I've laid out those pipes are more reliable than the way I've set it up here. For this, I don't think there's actually going to be any difference, but I am curious, so we're going to try it out. And that's pretty much the factory. I need to connect the end rail line back up to this part right here. And I very easily could just set up the sinks here, but I think what I want to do is just to kind of get a little bit of a head start on the next video, because I just have a feeling it's going to be long. I'm going to go back over to the grassy field train station and just knock out that last wall, because I do need to add more train stations. There's quite a few things that need to get dropped off there. And I might as well start with this stuff right here. So I'm going to extend that train station, and then I'm going to set up the train station for this one. So I just need to run a few power lines, do a little bit of decorating, a little remodeling over at the other train station, and then we can get this thing started. And welcome back to my final Caterium and copper sheets factory. So it came out pretty close to how I envisioned. Since the water right here is really shallow, and instead of having it just right on the edge of the waterfall, I wanted it to be right behind it, but kind of make it look like it was really sturdy. Like it wasn't going to just suddenly slide off the waterfall or anything, but you still get that really cool view of everything over here. And on this side, the rail line just comes all the way around, and then I just have it run right next to the building. So we just carved out some foundations, and it just runs right alongside. And then it does a similar thing, and then merges back up with the rail line. But like every other time, let's start at the farthest point, and we'll work our way back to the factory. The farthest point is the train station. The 1,038 copper sheets divided across the 2 freight cars means each one has 519. And then for the Caterium, it's 267 ingots for each one. And here are the nightmare diagrams I came up with to make these. At first glance, I didn't think these numbers were going to be that bad. And ultimately, they're not. Pretty much any load balancing, if you're just going to do the ratio split and you're not trying to do any limiting with the belt speeds or anything like that, splitters give you the ability to divide by 2 or 3, and mergers let you add either 2 or 3 numbers together. That is all of the functions we have. But when you break it down like that, it's really not that hard to deal with. But these ones were going to be a little bit big, and I didn't think that they were going to fit in this amount of space. So I added another floor, and these are the only ones at the very bottom so far. I'm really glad I gave myself so much room down here. So as you could probably guess by the look of these, the Caterium one is actually the easier one. For this one, since we're working with 270, that's a really convenient number, because you can divide by 3, and now you've got 90. Divide that by 3, and now I've got 30. Divide by 3, 10. Divide that one in half, and now I've got 5, and we do the 5-way split for that very last one. And so that 5 then becomes 6, because we're going to loop one of them back. And this splitter gives me my 3 that I need to loop back all the way back to the storage container, so that I'm left with 267 on this merger. And the copper, well, it just had to be really, really long. Since I need 519 out of here, that means I need to work with the Mark V belt, and we start with 780. Now, 780 itself, not really that great of a number to work with, because eventually you're going to end up having a 5-way split and a 13-way split. And I didn't want to deal with that. So instead, I'm looping back 20 to the very beginning, and now on this second belt here, I'll have 800. 800, a whole lot easier to work with. We can split that in half over and over again, so we get 400, 200, 100. Once we get down to 100, then we do a 5-way split, because then I can take 100, and then that becomes 120. And I'm just now realizing my diagram is probably a little confusing. So the row of mergers that is on the left are the ones that are sitting on top of everything else. Because the freight cars are so close together, unless I wanted to have one just kind of go off in a different direction, it was going to be easier if I stacked some of this stuff on top of each other. But in a diagram, it's a little bit harder to show that without it looking super chaotic. And I think I even put the row of mergers that's on the right is now on the left. So that I probably could have swapped around and it would have been a little bit easier to follow. I apologize for that. But it's like any of the other ratio splits that I've done. I'm just splitting it in half or into thirds over and over again until I run into a 5-way split. Then we do the merger followed by the 2 splitters. And eventually I end up with 519, and I join both of those up together and I'll have my 1038. And that is just going to go straight into a sink. Same with the 534 ingots. Here's the endpoint. Let's work our way back to the factory. Now we can visit the Caterium node. That just snakes around the big rock right here because I didn't really want it to go up and over. Right over here we've got the copper node, and that just runs right underneath the rail line. Alongside it, and then in on the other side. I made this blueprint, which is just a modified version of one of my other ones, using the high barriers, and if you delete one of them, then you can get access to the label 4-meter signs. If the high barrier is there, you cannot access those, so you need to make sure that the color is what you want, and then place the barrier on top of it. The downside to those is their range is pretty short, so once you get a decent distance, basically where I want to take screenshots for most of this, it all just disappears, which is, I understand, but at the same time, it's a bummer. And that's why I added the giant strip of small billboards all the way around it, so I wanted the highlight. Most of this is using the copper finish, and then the supports on the side are using the Caterium. So I figured yellow would be a good color. I've got the walkway that goes all the way around, and then we've got 2 more sets of ramp to blend the gap between the refineries and the train station. So instead of it just being a big section of flat, I think it fits really well with having the train station drop down like that. It does mean I don't have quite as much of my belts on display as I normally would, but at the same time it's Caterium ingots and copper sheets. I'm making these in half a dozen different places around the world, I think. And as we can see, the train is already running. I figured that was just easier since I've already got everything set up. Just turn that thing on now. Because of the numbers that I'm dealing with, I have it set to wait here for 6 minutes or 360 seconds, because that's how that menu works. And here at the front of the train station, I've got the catwalks to get you from that level all the way up to here. And then I've also got doors on either side that will take me to the logistics floor. And since they're kind of split up by the train, you kind of have to pick which side you want to go on. I've got all the water extractors. That's where the ore will come in and then get fed up above. And here is the output. Nice and simple. And here on the other side, pretty much the same thing. The ore will come in over there, final product comes down here, and then we've got our buffers. I was going for just simple and clean since we're only dealing with basic items here, and I like it. Last thing to do, let's turn this sucker on. Just like all the rest, I just need to queue up these smart splitters and sinks. And here we go. It looks like we are up to 100%. All the lights are stained white, what we want to see. But I really shouldn't be surprised. We're just making ingots and copper sheets here. So this should be able to ramp up to 100% really fast. Because I have the train set to wait here for 6 minutes, it is going to take probably 20 to 30 minutes to get an accurate picture of the throughput at the other train station. But that'll also give me plenty of time to let this run and make sure that there's no issues. I was pretty close. It took just over 30 minutes for the trains to kind of get up to speed and everything balance out on this end. I've got my 534 Caterium ingots, and this one still fluctuates a little bit, but we're reading 1038 most of the time. With this factory up and ready now, I have all of the pieces I wanted to build ahead of time ready. Most of them are already at that train station. I'll still have to do a little bit more logistics for like the plastic and rubber and some of the other things. But there is one last little side project I want to knock out before the final factory. For that, I will see you back out in the Dune Desert. Back out at my nuclear power plant, there is one last mistake that I want to turn into something positive. Because of a little whoopsie earlier on in the playthrough, I have 1,000 extra plutonium waste that I would kind of like to get rid of and not just leave here piled up in the industrial storage container. If we look at the codex, for every plutonium waste, I need 1 singularity cell and some dark matter residue, and I can create Ficsonium. And then with the Ficsonium, I can then turn that into a Ficsonium fuel rod. And that just needs some electromagnetic control rods, trigons, and good old excited photonic matter. So first up, I need to head back to the train station. Inside the train station, I happen to be sinking a few singularity cells. So let's just set down a container here and throw down a smart splitter. And for right now, just in case I don't come back in time, make sure that it has somewhere to go. We'll plug it into here, and I'm going to collect 1,000 singularity cells. Just like I'm sure many of you do, I do enjoy I'm Kibit's video, and I did think about doing something similar where I have a whole emergency waste processing facility. But this has been running for quite a while, and unless I screw something up in the future, this should just continue to run fine. So I'm just going to go with a good old temporary setup to turn all of this 1,000 waste into a bunch of Ficsonium fuel rods. Just one last sloppy temporary setup. Sometimes it feels good to just throw a bunch of machines together, get something done, and then delete it. So I've got my container of plutonium waste that is feeding into the particle accelerator with my singularity cells and some dark matter residue. I collected enough singularity cells, and this has just got to run for a while. The Ficsonium then goes into this container, and then we're feeding Ficsonium, trigons, and electromagnetic control rods into here. Although the trigons are definitely the ones that run out the fastest because you need a whole bunch of those. But thankfully I've got containers full. I don't have electromagnetic control rods going into a dimensional depot, so for that I had to create another little one. So we've got the high-speed connectors and some stators all being fed into here. But of course stators are another one that I'm not making, so I just needed a temporary one to throw some steel pipes and quick wire. Hopefully that should be enough. If I had more than 1,000, I would probably need to do a little bit more than just hand feed machines like this. Turning all the waste into the Ficsonium fuel rod should take just over an hour. While I'm refilling these containers, it gives me a chance to plug everything from my spreadsheet into one of the online calculators just to make sure that I got all of my math right. And I have all of the amounts that I need to have. Should have done this way sooner, but hey, better late than never, right? And just like that, it is all cleaned up. And it took me pretty much that entire time to plug everything into Satisfactory Calculator and get all the numbers right. I think those online tools are fantastic for the early to mid game. Once you get to the end game, especially if you're going to be picking your own recipes and not necessarily the ones that it's going to spit out, it takes a long time to pick all of the recipes and the right parameters and all of that. Thankfully, I only have to make one tiny minor adjustment to what I've done so far, but it's super easy to do, and we'll cover that in the next video. But I'm happy to say my plan for the ballistic warp drives looks good so far. Now, back to the Ficsonium fuel rods. For those, I decided to add on just a little emergency startup battery here, because that's essentially what this is. Right now, this whole thing is connected to the main grid just because I want these two batteries to charge up, and so they'll take a little bit longer to fully charge. Once these are fully charged, I'm going to disconnect it. I want these batteries here to be able to kickstart the water extractors, and then all I need to do is plug in that container. I didn't use it for the full thing, but I remembered about halfway through that I should just throw some summer sloops in there, because why not just get free Ficsonium fuel rods? So I've got a full container of 1,200 here, and then as a very last resort, I have an extra 173 in here. But if for some reason I crash my entire power grid, each one of these are completely overclocked, so that each one will produce 6,250. Meaning this little setup right here will provide 12,500 megawatts, minus what it takes to power on the water extractors here. And that right there should be enough to kickstart one of my smaller power grids, because that's unfortunately the only way I could think of doing this basically. Is if I crashed my power grid, I would disconnect a whole bunch of factories and then just go one by one and kind of work my way up my power grid. This right here will give me more than enough power to kickstart my turbo fuel power, which was the first one. That's only 20 gigawatts. From then, I would be able to run my rocket fuel power, which is another 74,000 megawatts, I think. And with those, then I'd be able to get this whole thing back up and running. If you click on the little fuel indicator right here, it'll tell you the fuel types, and this is what they burn at 100%. So normally it would go through 1 per minute, but since they're completely overclocked, each one goes through 2.5 per minute. With the amount that's in this container, I can run these for 240 minutes, which I really hope would be enough time to get everything back up and running. That is going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for being here. And a special thank you to everyone that likes, comments, and hypes the videos. It really does help. I've been saying this for a while, but the end is very close now. My plan is to finally make the ballistic warp drives in the next video. After that, I want to spend a little time cleaning up the world before I share it for the last time. Then I'll give a final world tour. This is where I'll talk about the different lessons I've learned and what I would do differently. That will wrap up this playthrough. My first completed save post 1.0. I have no doubt that Coffee Stain will entice me to start another save as soon as 1.2 releases, so let's cross our fingers for that being sooner than later. But don't worry, for those who would still like some more Moo content, I'll be trying out some other games and making some videos on those until then. And please, let me know which ones you would like to see me play in the comments. The other thing I would like to try to start doing is streaming. I have convinced a good friend of mine to start a Satisfactory playthrough, and the two of us have started to stream it. Most likely this will be on Sunday nights. I don't want to bite off more than I can chew, so I'm starting very basic and only to Twitch. Once I get the hang of things, I would love to stream to both YouTube and Twitch. But for now, baby steps. So look forward to all that, and thanks for watching.